Okay, so this session is called Music for Global Human Development, Promoting Health and Well-Being in Africa. I'm going to start off with some theory. Most of you might not have considered that music might be what I call a social technology for human development and human rights in particular. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to present little video clips of myself explaining the concepts. Then I'll stop and ask if there are any questions. We can review some of the material. This kind of interactive mode of presentation is very much in keeping with the theme of my talk, which is, in a nutshell, that people need to interact at an affective as well as cognitive level in order to develop the background that is needed on which to build a sense of the importance of human rights. Because it is through these kinds of interactions that our humanity is expressed and shared. And without that mutual recognition of our humanity, there can't be any recognition of human rights either. Human rights are not a matter of a legal framework alone or any kind of punitive framework alone, but rather they have to stem from a recognition of each other as being human. It's really that simple. If we could recognize each other as being human, the human rights would follow, because philosophically, they're rooted in that notion of humanity. Most of today's critical global humanitarian problems can be traced to the evolution of a parasitic global system engaged in the relentless, short-sighted accumulation of money and power. Very few can be pinned either on external cataclysms or dastardly individuals. Rather, they result ultimately from emergent interactions of social macrostructures within a dehumanized and dehumanizing system, overpowering individual humanity. The most lucid diagnosis of this situation, in my view, is a concept articulated by philosopher Jürgen Habermas, the system's colonization of the life world, that lived, meaningful social reality we inhabit as human beings seeking a stable, purposeful existence. Driven by money and power, the system hijacks the humanistic values of the life world. Sustainable solutions are required to restore and fortify the life world. What can ethnomusicology contribute? My response is music for global human development. Music is a powerful social technology for rehumanized connection. Music for global human development draws on social theory, ethnomusicological theory, and participatory action research. In the phenomenological tradition, Habermas recognizes the life world, the realm of lived intersubjective reality, as the locus of meaning and morality, where relationships of I, you, I, thou, or even we may displace I, it. Herein lies the possibility for humanistic action. For Habermas, the life world is sustained by rational, communicative action, fostering authentic intersubjective relations and understanding. But the system deploys meaning solely as an instrumental strategy for accumulating wealth and power. Mapped into unequal system positions, people's actions and even thoughts are constrained. System communications come to mediate relationships, inducing division and dehumanization. The system provides an essential stability function in the modern world. Crises only result when the system comes to colonize the life world, threatening human value. Percolating ever more deeply into its sustaining life world, the system threatens its own existence as well. We cannot transform the system directly, but we can transform our life world, and thus the kind of system it will support. One cannot overemphasize the urgency of rehumanization. As techno-optimism drives development funding, I reiterate that music is a powerful social technology, forging human connectivity across system-induced divisions, reweaving the social fabric. Okay, do we have any questions or comments? And feel free to turn on your camera or your audio and then camera. Jen says not yet. Okay, I know there's a lot of theory, and this is why I kind of want to break it down to make sure you're following along. So anybody else? Let's see who else is here now. Jen and Michael and Ivana. Any questions, comments? All right. Then I will continue. So this is just a brief review in case you had any comments. This is from an interesting photographer who does these sorts of aerial view photos of the developing world that really highlight the contrasts, the incredible contrasts between different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. So since there were no questions, I'm just going to go through these slides and continue. As I said before, the world is suffering from a lack of respect for human rights because of dehumanization. And that dehumanization traces almost exclusively to system colonization of the life world. It's very rare that you can find any individual who's actually causing dehumanization all on their own. It's all about the way economic and political systems interact. So dehumanization causes or enables colonization, because if you think about terrible tragedies in human history like slavery, it was only by dehumanizing Africans or indigenous people that these atrocities were able to be committed. And then once colonization happens, the colonization tends to increase the scope of dehumanization. So we have to break this cycle somehow. And I'm talking about ethnomusicology. I should mention, I don't know if you all know the word. So ethnomusicology is the study of all music, usually through a kind of social science lens, typically cultural anthropology. So I'm asking, what can music do and what can ethnomusicology do to break this destructive cycle and uphold human rights? The answer is that it can help to reweave the social fabric, to rehumanize relationships, to enhance social solidarity, and therefore strengthen the life world against the depredations of this colonizing system. Again, it isn't that we don't need a system or we don't want a system. We have to have a system. We have to have courts. You know, we want a functioning democracy. We don't want all power to be vested in individuals, but the system has to be held at bay. Otherwise, it tends to expand and colonize and devalue individuals and set their value essentially as economic value or political value only. Human rights cannot really be legislated. Human rights are rooted in humanistic feeling. So legal recognition and consequences may be important, but a sufficient and ultimately a necessary condition, I would argue, for upholding human rights is the mutual affective recognition of our common humanity. And this is what I believe music can help bring about. Music has the power to project our common humanity, our shared humanity, far beyond our bodies, even beyond our sociocultural collectivities, beyond our language groups, beyond ethnicities, towards global recognition. How this happens, though, that's the trick. It isn't that all music does this all of the time. There's music that does the reverse. So we have to be very careful in upholding music as a possible strategy. As I say, music is a powerful social technology, forging human connectivity across system-induced divisions, reweaving the social fabric. So let's go on to the next bit of theory to see how music does this. At the very core of the life world lies what I call the sound world, the epicenter of social interaction and solidarity. Here is a primary locus for the weaving and reweaving of the social fabric, especially via what I call resonance. The affective social power of communication via sound rests on 5 fundamental acoustic and psychoacoustic attributes: 3D diffusion, diffraction, masking, and vocalization of language and affect, what I call thought, feeling, and sound. In collective musicking, sound social power expands, maximizing linguistic, paralinguistic, and purely sonic expression. Collective focus, semantic ambiguity, shared associations, and sonic organization induce connection through common feeling. Music moves people and moves them together. But the affective power of sound is most intense in a sociosonic, cybernetic phenomenon I call resonance, an intensive, cognitive, affective, collective state resulting from adaptive, communicative feedback. Okay. Any questions, comments? Is it making sense? Anybody? I'm still following along. Thank you. Just check who's here now. There's just a few of you, so don't feel shy. Communicative feedback. So what I mean is, and it'll become more clear later, if you are in, let's say, in a conversation with somebody and you're engaged, you say something and they're really listening and they're getting it. They might not even agree with you, but there's a sense in which this feedback process is at the root of your mutual recognition of each other as thinking individuals, as thinking creatures, that is, as human, as thinking and feeling. And because the voice also carries emotion, even as I'm speaking now, I'm modulating my voice. The voice is very crucial to that kind of emotional expression, to convincing each other that we really are human beings. It's not just a kind of a system response. I'll give you an example of this, the kind of dehumanization that happens at our university. In many cases, people occupying particular nodes in the structure, they don't use their email, their personal email, even though it's an email issued by the University of Alberta. They don't like to use that. They want to use the email that says, you know, assistant to the dean. And so you don't even know who's behind that email. And if you send a note to them, you may get back a response without a name. So this is the kind of dehumanization that the system tends to promote. Sure, the administrators will say, oh, that's good, because that way if we switch who's in that position, we don't have to know who the new person is. But you're not really connecting with a person. When you connect with a person, then you get these feedback cycles that really emphasize each other's humanity. Now, it works the best face-to-face, but it can also work in other ways. It can also work through social media, for example. But there has to be some chance to recognize each other's humanity. One thing that's become very popular, of course, in social media are the emojis, right? Because there was really a lack. And actually, I came from the tech sector originally, and there used to be ways of doing it just with alphanumeric characters, like a colon and then a right parentheses, and then they developed all the emojis. But this is a way people felt the lack, that you need to be able to express yourself when chatting with somebody, to use various lingo and so on that expresses your feelings. Then that person expresses back. That's how you get communicative feedback. Now, if we transpose this to music, there's many more possibilities. The musicians, the way they interact with each other, they don't necessarily have to have a natural language in common. They're using music to do that kind of communicating. They're communicating with an audience through music. The audience is communicating back in some way, maybe by clapping, or maybe by cheering, or maybe by smiling, or maybe by dancing. But there are these possibilities of communicative feedback that enable these flows of emotion to happen. And that's what I call resonance, when that really builds up, because it could be muted. It could be in some kinds of music, you don't have that much feedback, especially in classical music. But when you have an audience and you have a performer, there will be some level of feedback. I hope that helps explain communicative feedback. So when you get feedback loops, sometimes the literal physical meaning of it. You get, for example, squealing from the microphone so that's feedback, but that's just a mechanical feedback or electromechanical feedback. I'm talking about feedback through human communication. Okay, I'm going to go on. So the way I conceive of it is that we have the system and the life world, but what's core to the life world is that sound world. Because of all the factors that I mentioned, because sound diffuses in all directions. You don't have to have a line of sight. Everybody can be hearing the same thing. It goes around obstacles. It carries emotion. It carries language, and it carries emotion. And it also is susceptible to resonance. So we have all of those possibilities. And what we end up with is a kind of a unified experience. So if you imagine going to a concert with people, you are willy-nilly immersed in the same sound world. It would be difficult to communicate outside of that sound world. You're all immersed in it, and you're part of the communicative feedback. And in many cases, the sound is very loud, and I think one of the reasons is precisely to ensure that everybody has that shared experience, although it's often too loud for me. So collective music making is sort of the maximal form of collective communicative feedback that we have as human beings. It gives us a collective sensory focus, but it's also ambiguous. And this is a very important point, that because music is ambiguous, everyone doesn't interpret it the same way. It may trigger particular memories for you. A lot of music is very abstract, And so even though it's something that's shared, it can also it's automatically personalized, each person interpreting it in their own ways. So it can link everybody together in a kind of flexible way, not in a rigid way. For example, if someone is giving a speech in English, then somebody who doesn't know English simply cannot follow. But with music, it's not like that. But there are also shared associations, common meanings. And then sonic organization. In many kinds of music, you have, for example, a call and response form that automatically engages the listeners because there's a place for them to respond. I found this a lot when I was working in Ghana, for example. The songs generally have a response section. So there's a caller and there's a response. And that induces some kind of social connectivity also. The empathy or the common feeling that you get by sharing that sound space, and resonance, which I just talked about. Okay, go on. A social network comprises a set of nodes representing subjects or social positions, plus a set of links representing social connections. These nodes and links may be purely formal and dehumanized. The minimal network is a dyad, two nodes connected by a link. Adding nodes, the network gets more complex. Adding links, density increases. Resonance implies communicative feedback cycles, centering on sonic flows of thought-feeling, adapting to participants and their environment, entailing mutual humanistic recognition, and transforming node to subject, link to thread. The resonating link carries and is sustained by communication of thought-feeling between its endpoints. The same resonance process unfolds in a larger communicating network. Resonance moves people and moves them together in affective convergence. Resonance has conditions, including inclusiveness, feedback channels, and flexibility enabling individual expression. However, participation here is not limited to musical performance in the narrow sense, but rather generalized musical performance. The most powerful force for collective resonance is what we may call generalized music, sonic expressions of thought, feeling, fusing language, voice, and sound, expressing our common humanity to one another. This generalized music transcends music proper to include affective sound generally and associated movement, gesture, even conversation. Resonance spins social threads, rehumanizing network links, and reweaving the warp and weft of the life world. Resonance restores the life world by reweaving the social fabric in two interlocking directions, horizontally across communities and vertically across generations. For most of human history, socio-musical resonance developed through live face-to-face interactions. But resonance can occur within and transform any social network, live or mediated. Unmediated resonance tends towards traditional music, more localized but intergenerational, supporting cultural continuity. Feedback and adaptation are rapid, but impact is narrower. Adaptation in the mediated life world is slower. Its impact is more extensive. Here, popular music can develop solidarity around key development issues, particularly among the youth. Okay, we have a question. How has the increased use of Zoom and other platforms like this one affected things? Yeah, so, this is the trade-off between mediated and unmediated. Very roughly, when music, as well as conversation or, let's say a symposium like this one, if it's face-to-face, if we were all in the same room, it would have more impact. However, because it's being transmitted over this tool, Hop-In, there's the possibility for a much broader range of dissemination. Now, it so happens there aren't that many people here. How many are there? Well, about 4. But it could be many, many more. And so, Zoom and Google Meet and these sorts of tools, they enable that kind of greater distribution, but in real time. So there's sort of two issues, I guess, in when you talk about mediation and mediated resonance. One is that the communication is mediated by something like a telephone call, Zoom, and the other is the lack of real-time synchrony. So, for example, I could record something and you could listen to it, and they say that they're recording this, so maybe somebody in the future will be listening to it. At that point, it will be much slower to get any feedback. Right now, I'm asking you all, do you want feedback, right? You can turn on your audio and video link, or you can type something into the chat. But if it were just a recording, you wouldn't have that option. But you see this also, if you go on YouTube, the comments are also often very interesting, and the people who post the videos are often very interested in the comments. So there is this sort of slower feedback loop. The same thing happens with more traditional technologies, for example, LPs or tapes or CDs that, now Spotify. The artists may release something, and it could be a poem, it could be a speech, it could be anything. And then there is some channel for feedback, but it's going to be slower. So the mediation widens the angle of exposure, but it also slows the whole process down. So you don't get resonance in the same way. If it's everybody kind of interacting, you could find resonance happening very quickly as people begin to speak and to kind of enthuse, and maybe it's a heated debate about something, but they're still interacting and recognizing each other's humanity. So I hope that it is in between, though. You're right. Anything else? Okay, then we'll move on. Yeah, so I like to use the network of the analog or the metaphor of the social network. It can either represent the more formalized links that are characteristic of the system, or the more humanized links, which I then call threads. So I have this double terminology. There's the network, which is nodes and links. Those could refer to computers and communications links in the technical sense, but they can also be people communicating in an organization. But what happens with resonance and with music, with these sort of rich forms of human communication that are also emotional, is that we transform the network node to an actual subject. So you start to see each other as people, as humans, rather than simply as positions. And we transform the network link to what I call a thread. And the reason I use the word thread is because out of this, you weave the social fabric. So social fabric is the humanized version of social network. And that's what moves people together and kind of forms these little affective structures. Maybe these are people who shared a concert. And we have conditions for this to happen, for resonance to happen, that the form has to be flexible, there has to be feedback channels, and it has to include everybody. So when you think about a very distanced audience, let's say in classical music, where they're kind of literally in the dark and the performers are on stage brightly lit, and there isn't really very much opportunity to participate, that's going to lead to less resonance. I won't say there's no resonance, but less than, let's say, a jazz performance or a blues performance in a different venue. And one thing to note about resonance is that there's adaptation in resonance. This is a really key feature, that it adapts through flexibility, through kind of an improvisational flexibility, whether it's music or speech. What I'm telling you right now, I haven't written it down. I'm just responding based on comments, the limited feedback I'm getting from you. I'm trying to formulate my talk. So I can adapt. If it were 1,000 people out there, I might speak differently. If I knew you were all sociologists, I might speak differently. So I can adapt, and you can adapt. And so the whole thing, in adapting, it enhances its power. Its power is amplified. And we get this affect of social solidarity. The idea of generalized music, when I say music, I don't really mean just music per se. I mean music and song, but also other kinds of expressive forms, maybe a sermon or a chant, movement, and then really anything carried by sound. And it doesn't even have to be sound alone, but sound has those properties that enable it to be particularly powerful for all the reasons I stated. So we get the social threads, and then this sort of metaphor of the kente cloth that's being woven through the warp and weft of the cloth in both directions. So the warp being the diachronic between generations, passing down from one generation to the next, and the weft going across communities. Now, this happens automatically in traditional societies, at least. What's happened in modern society is that we've kind of distanced from each other through Zoom and through everybody kind of occupying their little node within the system. So we have to struggle to break out of that and to reconnect with each other as human beings. But in traditional societies, this is happening all the time already. So we don't have to enact any interventions, any ethnomusicological interventions. I already talked about this, so I won't go over this slide. Okay, next little drop of theory. Oh, it's not yet. Okay, so yeah, we have the network level of explanation, nodes, links, and the network, and then the fabric level of explanation. When things get rehumanized, we have subjects, we have threads, and we have the social fabric. So again, Habermas's view is that the life world requires communicative action to be upheld, but he is always focusing on rational discourse. And my view, coming from a musical perspective, is sure, we need reason, but it isn't sufficient because human connection is always affective. Nobody actually believes anything, including whether their fellow human is really a human or not, without some sort of affective sense that, yes, they are. And it may be obvious when the person's standing in front of you, but what if that person is just, you know, an email? It could have been generated by ChatGPT. So we have to have this affective sense that this is really a person, it's not an AI. So the aim, again, is to restore the life world, to strengthen it by developing the sound world through resonance, through this shared thought feeling for affective rehumanization, transforming the social network to social fabric. Replacing the objectified relationship, the I-it, which is characteristic of the system, with a more humanized I-thou, in Martin Buber's words. We can also use the lyrics of a song to highlight current issues, to highlight key themes. So we can bring in the development both through the rehumanization and by highlighting issues that need to be highlighted. Now, you could offer a critique at any moment and say, well, how were these social threads spun by musical resonances, for example, at a concert we all attend? By the way, we have a concert of Tanzanian music this evening. I'll just put a plug, 7:30 in Convocation Hall on the University of Alberta campus. So people may attend and they may be happy to be there and smiling at each other and clapping and everything. But what happens when they all leave? Does anything remain? So my response is that the threads are maintained when you have a durable organization to contain them. So for example, the John Humphrey Center or human development projects, for example, Music for Global Human Development, which is something I've developed over the past, 12 or more years. And each such project involves a group of people who are working together. And as long as the project is going, those people continue to interact. So let's now go on. Ideally, Music for Global Human Development should reweave the warp and weft together, but many projects focus on one or the other, depending on musical style and modality of social interactions. Traditional face-to-face music for cultural continuity within a cultural group has a warp focus, and popular mediated songs oriented towards generational issues across groups has a weft focus. All this within the critical social crucible, the sound world. But resonance is not an unconditional good. Indeed, the system can exploit resonance to exacerbate division. One way to avert such an outcome is to foster resonance in inclusive global social networks, crisscrossing system-induced divisions. Music for Global Human Development aims for such inclusion and scope via participatory action research. Participatory action research is a collaborative strategy for positive social change in a community. Ideally, PAR entails egalitarian team participation. All cooperate in a grassroots action network coupled with research gauging effectiveness. Collectively, the network formulates a plan, carries it out, observes its impact, reflects on its results, then refines it, spiraling upwards. Far too many development projects inadvertently absorb system-level agendas. Being inclusive and empowering, PAR is both more ethical and more effective, building local capacity, fostering sustainable, scalable methods, and meeting real needs. PAR gathers a diverse group of participants motivated by an urgent issue into an egalitarian, open social network, crisscrossing social boundaries. Ideally, this network itself resonates with powerful shared thought feeling, transforming into a new layer of global social fabric. While the long-term objective is positive transformations in the broader community, the immediate result is the rehumanization of relationships connecting project participants themselves, erasing the boundaries that mask our common humanity. Thus, the PAR network is both means and an end in itself. I conceive of each project as being double-sided, connecting the local to a wider global, and thereby effecting humanizing social transformations, bridging local empowerment from despair to hope, and global awareness from indifference to compassion. Okay, do we have any questions? I wanted to mention that if you're interested in any of these projects, you can check out this website, which contains some of the videos and also links to all the projects I'm about to talk about, in case we don't have time to go through everything. Projects in West Africa, East Africa, and in Egypt. So, okay, I'll continue. So again, we have these two main facets. There's this sort of warp focus, and there's this sort of weft focus. The warp focus, I've tended to try to promote, to collaborate with people who are interested in projects that basically resuscitate, revive, or revivify traditional music in general, just to kind of keep because often it's being lost. Okay, it's being lost to modernity. It's being lost to, people watching TV and so on. And then the Songs for Sustainable Development, this WEFT focus, these tend to focus on particular development issues. For example, maternal health. We'll see a project focused on that, on malaria prevention. Again, music for global human development music is never an unequivocal good. Resonance is never an unequivocal good. It's used in fascism, to build up nationalism. So we have to be very careful how we formulate projects to make sure that they don't inadvertently or advertently reinforce these sorts of boundaries, these sort of insider, outsider, I, it, or I, you, even just, recognizing others, but not recognizing them as being as human as we are. We want to make inclusive projects that kind of bring everybody together, ideally. These are all very idealistic statements, but the idea is to remain open, to try to interconnect different communities, academics, non-academics, old and young, rich and poor, to try to bring everybody together with an equal voice and to avoid falling into the trap of reinscribing the patterns of colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and all those system processes that are actually at the root of the problem. And participatory action research is a strategy for doing that. So I went through the cycle. The difficulty with this is that it doesn't really lend itself naturally to typical funding, because you run out of funding and you can't continue it. And this has happened to me on a number of occasions. Also in academia, you're supposed to publish. And this process is really, ideally, it's just ongoing. It's ongoing work. And that's the hardest kind of work to promote. But when people are committed to it, it can happen. The social networks that come out of this are key. People get to know each other. They communicate. It might be online because we can't all travel all the time. But we do develop some sense of resonance. It's maybe a remote kind of resonance if you're comparing it to an actual live musical event, say. But I would say it's resonance nevertheless between all of these different constituencies, and generating a new form of social fabric that ideally connects people across the world. It's community-based, but it also connects to outside of that community to try to raise awareness, compassion, and care. So returning to our initial question, what can ethnomusicology do, or music do? As an intervention, then, this Music for Global Human Development, PAR network, can promote socio-musical resonance, transforming the social network of I-it relations to a more humanized social fabric of I-thou relations. So this network is both a means and an end. It's a development strategy that becomes a microcosm of the broader aim, which is to reweave the social fabric, ideally globally. And again, we have these two components to it. So here's some of the projects that I've been working on. There are other projects that could probably be described in the same ways. Music for Continuity and Songs for Development. So the continuity, this is the sort of the warp focus. There's one project in Ghana called Kinka, and one in Egypt that's centered on Aswan I'm still working on. And then Songs for Development, where there's an explicit development message. There's a Liberian one, Giving Voice to Hope for Liberian refugees, a sanitation project that we did in Liberia, in Monrovia, in the capital, Singing and Dancing for Health in northern Ghana, which was more a face-to-face as opposed to mediated project. And then If You Have Heart, a mediated project in Ethiopia. So in the remaining time, I'm going to go through some of this and show how it works. Are there any questions at all? I'll just stop briefly and see. Where are we? No, keep going. Okay, well, that was from before. All right. So I don't see anything in the chat. Wait, something just came into the chat. Eager to see the videos. Okay. We will now see the videos. All right. So loss of cultural continuity in Ghana and Kinka. Ghana is a site where I've been doing research and working since 1988. I worked with this man whose pen name is Nova. He's a poet and a singer. He's the lead singer for this group called Lebanon. It's a funeral association. There's a lot of music that gets made during funerals. And this is traditional. It sort of reweaves the community after one of the members dies. They perform songs together. This is from 1988. Well, with modernity, especially with the electrification of the villages, a lot of this was being lost. Many youth were drifting away from these traditions under the influence of popular media. Once you get electricity, and then there were mobile phones, and people were kind of diverted from this more traditional form of social solidarity. So the membership in this group was declining. And when I went back to him after all those years, I asked him, Nova, what would, I felt actually it had been a very long time. I went back in 2006, and he told me what he'd like me to do, of all the things I could do, is to create a cassette, because other people were getting their songs more well-known through cassettes at that point, and even before then, but it was still the cassette in 2006. So we did this double-sided project with a cassette in Ghana, and I think I pressed, I believe, around 1,000 of them. And he sold them, so it also raised some money for him and for his leading singers and for the group. And then we made a CD for the more global market, which contained liner notes, very extensive, that were basically a distillation of my master's thesis that explained all about the music and about the community and about the people and so on as an educational tool. We've used it some in our teaching, and just recently someone wrote to me from Ireland asking for a copy. So both sides of the project are there. The network that got formed was quite extensive. It involved a lot of my students, because I was bringing students to Ghana for many years. So there were study abroad students, but we also involved people in the art and design program here, in the music program, to do the artwork, to do some of the editing of the tracks. I involved a couple of people in Ghana who were working sort of in this sphere of culture. And then I involved the people in the group itself, the singers and the drummers. Oh, and then the interesting thing was the connection to the mediated form of resonance. There's a radio station, very local one, called Jubilee Radio. This is in southeastern Ghana, in the Volta region. They took a cassette and they put it on the radio. And so according to Nova, it actually had the effect of sort of bringing people back to the music. This is one of his songs. Okay, in a second project, dehumanization in a Liberian refugee camp and giving voice to hope. Now, you might think of a refugee camp as being inhospitable to music, but to my surprise, when we first visited this camp in Ghana in 2007, filled with some 40,000 Liberian refugees who had already transited Cote d'Ivoire, because Ghana and Liberia don't border, there was actually lots of music going on. And so my question to myself at this point was, I guess it was 2007, what can music actually do? It was before I had formulated all the theories and everything. And so what we ended up doing was to actually collect some of the music that had already been produced in demos and issue it as a CD to raise money, raise profile for the musicians, to kind of musicify, as I called it, the camp, to encourage music making in the camp, which was made both in studios and also in churches. And then also to raise awareness, because most people in Canada couldn't find Liberia on a map. So here's the map, and some of the places we went on my summer program. And one of them was this Kokrobite village, which is very close to Accra, which is just to the right. And then the camp is right next to it. So we visited the camp. We met with someone who led a CYE, which is one of the many NGOs that were operating at the time. And we agreed that we were going to do this. So here's Liberia, and you can see people had moved across. I'm not going to go through the whole history, but the war had started in 1989, and it was a very brutal war. Around 250,000 people dead, 800,000 internally displaced, spread across West Africa. Many of them did wind up in Ghana, although a much smaller number than were in some of the other neighboring countries. Really horrific conflict, many atrocities. And so in the post-war Liberia, there were all these human losses. There was a devastated infrastructure. There was really no place for people to go back to. And so a lot of people just stayed where they were in Ghana for many, many years. Some of them had come as early as 1990 and were still there when we visited in 2007. People were born in the camp. There really weren't resources back in Monrovia. So this project came about. Here's a scene of the camp. A very difficult place to live. I just spent a couple of nights there. Extreme conditions, really, inadequate sanitation. I did have some students who had been volunteering, so I had some connections in. And we had this link to the Center for Youth Empowerment. This is Elise Pourbe, one of my students who also had been volunteering there. Slebe Sene, now in Philadelphia, I believe. But at the time he was running this NGO for the youth. And so the question was, you know, how would we get involved? What could we do? Could we teach music, document music, preserve music? And then we found that there were all these demo recordings on cassettes and on CDs. So we wound up just putting that together and making our own recording. Samuel Morgan was one of the key people in the camp. He was actually orphaned in the war, but he had set up his own studio. And then another man, S-Man, Samuel Morgan is now in the US, and S-Man is now in the Toronto area. He also had a studio. So it's quite remarkable to see music flourishing. I mean, music may not flourish when there's actual conflict, but once people settle down, music is important to them. And people were even trying to make it in the music scene in Ghana. So we wanted to try to support popular music making, to raise musicians' profiles, to get them some financial support, and also to raise Canadian awareness. Again, it's a double-sided project. So we decided to make this music CD. As a kind of a group, we put our heads together. What should we do? Participatory action research. And we should make very extensive liner notes to really explain the situation. And we came up with this project, Giving Voice to Hope. There were several cycles of this. I'll just talk about the initial one, the CD, but we then made a documentary about music in Buddha Borum. And then we came up with a couple of other songs, Giving Voice to Health, Giving Voice to Education. So there's this sort of sense that it keeps on spiraling. And even just last year, I did a kind of follow-up with some of the musicians. One is now in China, one is in Morocco, a couple of them are in US and Canada, to see sort of how they've continued, how music has continued to support them. This was the 2008 network. We were working with people in Ghana, people at the University of Alberta, gathering the CDs. We edited 16 tracks and came up with this CD. And if any of you would like a copy, I'm now just giving them away to people who I feel can really use them. At the time we sold them, and I ended up convincing the university to pay the royalties on all 5,000. We were very ambitious. Nobody ever sells 5,000 CDs, at least not at that point. We sold around 1,000, I think. And then we paid the royalties for all 5,000 to the groups, which is really quite useful for them because they were really on the verge of, a few years later anyway, they were on the verge. I think we released this in 2009. By 2013, most of them had left. A few of them are still in Ghana. And we had periodic meetings when I would bring students to Ghana. We would meet up. Here's some of my students meeting up with musicians. some of the songs.
This one is for the begging distress, politician hypocrite, seeking self-interest. You wanna be the next leader, put your guns down, stop the war. We are tired of seeing dead body, displaced people, refugees seeking refuge, seeing our home burning down to ashes. Ashes to ashes is burning down.
So you hear that the music is very upbeat, but the lyrics are very difficult. The themes are tough. They tackle them head on, issues of power, issues of violence. And really, these are all system issues that they're addressing in the lyrics of these songs. So the songs sort of promote an awareness, both for people locally and for people in other parts of the world. As I said, Shadow was one of the main producers, but he also had that single. Here's a couple of others. I don't really have time to play them all, but there were many different genres. For example, No More War is a kind of a reggae style.
We don't want no more war in Africa. We don't want no more fighting in Africa.
So that was a reggae one. He's now living in Morocco. And then S-Man is in Canada.
Because of power, they are killing one another. Because of power, they are destroying the future. Destroying the future, destroy the children's future. Destroying the future, destroy the nation's future. People are dying, people are crying. The children are suffering from that fighting.
So again, very difficult words. Using many different musical genres, reggae, gospel, hip-hop, hip life, which is a kind of a modern high life, incorporating hip-hop in Ghana, something called hip-ko, which is popular in Liberia, gospel, very popular. Whoops. That one's in a local language. Some of them used local languages.
We can continue to live like this. When you stop the raises, leave the blacks alone. We're sick and tired of this. When you stop around.
So this is the social power of song. You know, it creates resonance among the people who listen to it, feedback to the artists, but it's also got those very powerful lyrics. And there were many different collaborators on that one, weaving this network together. I have some nice documentary with Shadow, but you can go to the link that I put in the chat, maybe to watch some of those on your own. He's a really fascinating guy who managed to do everything totally on his own as an orphan and sort of became the nucleus of the project. And then we did this film about him. So I'll let you can watch that on your own. Okay, Sanitation was a song that we did with some of the musicians, the Liberian musicians who went back to Monrovia. This is a music video this time. It was put on local TV. I'll just play a tiny bit of it. And it had a big network because this was a more ambitious sort of production with video people and WASH, you know, water and sanitation experts and so on, and various NGOs. Let me find the, oops.
Sanitation. Sanitation is what you need. So get the area and safety clean. Always keep the dirt away. Cleanliness is best to find us. Sanitation is what you need. So get the area and safety clean. Always keep the dirt away. Cleanliness is best to find us. Everybody listen up. This is not a compliment to the every nation. Sanitation is step up predicament. Every community need Latins development. My people need help education. I recommend in every house, every school, and every environment. We need to teach them and learn how to implement sanitation, water purification with supplement. Management and drainage around our water places.
So anyway, I'm going to stop it, but again, that link is also on our site. Okay, Singing and Dancing for Health, this was in Northern Ghana. It's a bit different because this one is a face-to-face project. So the resonance is of a more immediate type. Basically, I got some funding from the university, a little bit from Global Affairs Canada to do this project. We ended up working in 3 villages, performing with a large troupe of people using drama, that is theater, comedy. We used some local actors who are locally popular, singing and dancing, and really trying to bring out people from each village to hear these themes. We targeted especially the leaders of the village. We got them on side, the members of the Legislative Assembly, the chiefs, the imams, the pastors, the religious leaders, everybody. And it was a large team, people from Ghana, people from Canada. We worked with this youth home cultural group, which is based in Northern Ghana, Tamale. I've known them since 2007, and they did a lot of the productions. So we created these dance dramas promoting public health, including malaria preventions and sanitation. And then we performed interventions in 3 villages. And one thing I should mention about the Liberia project is that some people would come to me and say, oh, great project. What was the impact? And I had no way to answer that question. I realized I didn't have the statistics. I didn't have what people in public health usually need in order to justify the funding. So this time I was determined to do it right. We did a pre and post survey of people in these villages in order to actually see the results. These are the villages you can see on a map where we worked. I had meant to do more, but I just couldn't get more funding to do it. And we performed. So we had research before the intervention, then the dance dramas, and then we researched after the intervention. It was quite a complex campaign, and the network was correspondingly rather large. We had writers in Accra, video producers. We set up posters. We put them everywhere. We did the choreographies. Here's some of the research assistants carrying out the surveys, because many of the people we surveyed were not literate, and so it had to be done by hand. And these are some of the performances. I'll play you just a brief clip. You can see the whole village is gathered. We're talking about malaria. Youth Homer in the blue shirts. And using traditional musical forms, traditional drums. Getting the kids involved, very important. Multi-generational. So the drama here is that if people would use mosquito nets, then they could prevent a lot of malaria. So the woman is going to be running away from the mosquito. The mosquito enacted by a comic actor. There she's running away. And then she ducks under. He hits the treated net and he falls over. And of course everyone loved this. So this was very popular, and our surveys show that it was actually effective, but it was expensive to do this. So on a second phase, I managed to get some money to actually start youth groups in 2 of the towns. And we put together these youth groups, we trained them, we equipped them, we got them costumes, and they continued the Singing and Dancing for Health idea, but now embedded within the community in the hopes that this will take hold, take root within the local oral tradition. And they are still flourishing in at least a couple of the communities. Here's a picture of some of them getting trained. I don't have time to talk about it, but Youth Home made the drums for them, so they also benefited. And then we brought in talented junior high school students to get trained, and they ended up performing for the local chief and inaugurating the group. It was a lot of fun, and they're very proud to be members. More recently, what we've done is,
first of all,
this is the chief of the village.
I'd like to thank the Almighty God.
Anyway, he was very appreciative. I know I have to stop in a minute. I just wanted to see if there's any questions. But the nice thing about this was that it really got embedded within the community, and they continue to perform to today. COVID was a little bit of a setback, but let me just stop there. There's another music video on maternal health in Ethiopia. But yeah, let's just take the last little bit, see if there's any questions. Can you describe the impact of this song, not only in building an art network around them, but also in delivering a message? So on the one where we did the survey in northern Ghana, we had statistics. And if you go on that website that I gave you, you'll see the papers. We published several papers about it. We actually had hard evidence that it changed people's awareness. Health people talk about CAP surveys. So there's knowledge, attitude, and practice. So you try to give people the knowledge, and then you try to change attitudes, because without a changed attitude, the knowledge doesn't mean anything. And that's where the emotions or the affective power of music comes in. It's more memorable, it's more effective, it's more social. And then the practice is actually you have to change also. Anything else? I don't know if we have to stop exactly at 1:30. If not, I could show you a bit of the Ethiopian video. Organizers, you can chime in. Yeah. Music used to be used more in political campaigns. It's kind of interesting to me. Tony Seeger, an eminent ethnomusicologist, did a series recently on the Great Courses series, which some of you may know, about the Folkways recordings and American music history. And there's a whole segment on political use of songs, which of course are often designed to create tensions. I mean, they're not necessarily the kinds of music I'm talking about, because it may be saying, we're the good party and that's the bad party. But many political campaigns in the US had their music. And I don't hear too much music anymore, but I think that they do use it at rallies and so on. Again, not necessarily in a good way, but it is powerful. In Colombia, it's fundamental. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know around the world how music is used politically. What we do know is at the system level, because politics is one half of the system, the other half is the economic system. It certainly is used. I mean, every advertising campaign has its jingle. I mean, that's unequivocal. That's there. Politics, I don't hear it as much, but maybe some parts of the world, it's there. So if we have an extra minute or two, I'll just I'll play you a little bit of that last bit, because it's a powerful song. So, and when this is the network for the Northern Ghana Project, these got ever more complicated, but they required funding, which is why starting the youth groups was really such a great way to continue the cycle. So now the tragically high maternal and neonatal mortality rates in Ethiopia, this is primarily in the rural areas. And unfortunately, the project has been halted by fighting in that country. First, it was more in the north, and now it's in the Amhara region. So we haven't been able to move forward, but it was sort of a very tiny add-on to a $6 million project that was designed to train midwives, or to train trainers of midwives, to strengthen referral procedures, and to build quality institutions in order to reduce the maternal and neonatal mortality rates and to improve maternal health and neonatal health. So that was a huge project. It was funded by Global Affairs Canada. It was based here at the University of Alberta. But the music video itself, that piece was very, very inexpensive. It's just that Global Affairs Canada doesn't realize that music can be such an effective tool. They're not willing to fund it. So these are some of the partners in this senior midwife tutor training program. What they found was that the presence of a skilled birth attendant is the biggest factor in ensuring maternal and neonatal health. And the government has actually provided these, but in the rural areas, very few households were actually making use of them. And the question is it because it was not available to them? In some cases, it might not have been. But in many cases, the government had provided these health clinics. Part of the problem then was lack of awareness. And this is where the music campaigns can come in. In tradition, in the Ethiopian tradition, and we're talking about many ethnic groups. There's some 50 or 60 languages, it is considered proper and traditional to give birth at home. And so then if anything goes wrong, the woman may die or lose the baby or both. And these cultural traditions are often enforced by the husbands. So our efforts were directed towards changing attitudes of the husbands as much as anybody else. One way the Ethiopian government was doing that was through these signboards, but a lot of people aren't literate or they won't see the signboard. So we produced this song called Lib Yale, If You Have a Heart, produced by Thomas Gobina, who's an Ethiopian living in Washington, D.C., a very good music producer as well as a bassist. And it was performed by two of the most famous singers in Ethiopia. I mean, there are household names across the country. Zeritu Kebede, a woman who sings in Amharic, and Tadele Gemechu, who sings in Oromo, the other main language. They're the two big stars. So we tried to address the two main languages of the country with English subtitles. So there's Thomas, and he was appointed a UNICEF ambassador. And so he had some clout with UNICEF, and they also chimed in to help us. Zeritu, very, very famous singer, Tadele. So here's the song itself. I'll play, I guess, this excerpt of it. We started with the more cognitive messaging, that is the situation, the tragic situation in Ethiopia, this huge maternal mortality and neonatal mortality rate, especially in the rural areas, primarily rural.
Walked on a burden to blow your soul.
So it's a very tragic song, but it carried this message, and it was very, very popular when we put it on YouTube. Huge network of participants. We put together a survey, though, so we got almost 1 million views to the present. But when I put together this survey, what it showed was that most people were Amharic speakers, and they were actually male, but living more highly educated and mostly living in Addis Ababa, the capital city. So it was not reaching the rural areas, which is understandable because they don't have typically access to the internet. It's too costly, or maybe the mobile phone networks don't reach. So most of the viewers were highly educated urbanites, and this was not the way to reach the rural populations that need the message. So what I'm doing right now is we're working with Farm Radio, which is a Canadian NGO, to try to reach into those rural areas, and also with a charity called Maternity Today, to try to bring the song into those rural areas. And Farm Radio has this very established way of working through local radio stations, and also by enabling a feedback loop. So they have this very unique technology, this interactive radio technology called Uliza, whereby listeners can actually call a number on their regular mobile phone, not a smartphone, just a regular phone. The system calls them back, and then they can provide their responses to questions, even record their own voice, and then it goes on the air. So it creates this kind of resonance through the radio, which is really unique. So we already had an audio version. We put together a campaign to raise money for this. We raised all the money that we needed, but unfortunately now it's on hold because of the war. So what I'm hoping is that soon we'll be able to run these 4 episodes. We raised $12,000, and after that we need to do a huge campaign, ideally to put on a radio, a series of radio programs for about a year to really try to change people's attitudes. But it's going to be quite expensive to do that. But anyway, the cycle continues, and hopefully we'll reach our goal. And as long as I'm around, I'll continue to work on this. So that's all I have. If there are any final questions, feel free. Is anyone still here? Yeah, a few. Well, thank you for sticking with it. Again, I encourage you to check out that website, musicforglobalhumandevelopment.org. And you can go to my website where I also have a lot of papers and things that are relevant to this. You can click and get all the videos that I showed today and maybe share with others. If anybody wants to get a CD, the librarian CD, you just send me an email. And if I can answer any other questions, be happy to do that. Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks for joining us. Take care, everybody.